Unhealthy lifestyles are causing 50 to 70% of all healthcare costs. So instead of looking for the cure, we need to cure inside ourselves.
Mindfulness is paying attention to our present moment experiences with openness and a willingness to be with what is.
Pretty much all of my songs are about mindfulness.
Mindfulness is a very wonderful state to be in because it's a state of peace.
We can teach this in our healthcare system. We can teach this in our schools. This is healing our veterans.
I thought, bring it into a hospital. The doctors would say, you were able to help her more in 8 weeks than I've been able to help her in 8 years. And I would just smile and say, well, she did it herself.
I was anchoring the news updates on Good Morning America. My heart was racing, my lungs seized up. I actually just couldn't breathe. So I had to quit right in the middle. I was of the view that meditation was for hippies, but it's simple and secular. You don't have to sit in a funny position. You don't have to join a group. You don't have to believe in anything.
I was homeless and gonna end up in jail or dead. I had to develop a lot of strategies to survive, how to rewire a lot of the self-defeating thoughts that I had. Mindfulness is learning to become a whole human.
Pre-season, I got injured. I didn't really know who I was if I wasn't playing basketball. And that's when I started getting into drugs and alcohol. So I got into mindfulness for survival, and then it became not to survive, but to thrive.
I'd lived in 5 different family configurations, and every one of them had been switched because of trauma or loss. I heard about the prospect of meditation practice that could make you a lot happier.
In order for us to have a focused and calm day, we know that we have to start with mindful moments.
Among novice practitioners, we saw changes in the brain after just 2 weeks of practice.
This is how social change happens. When we start being more compassionate and self-aware, these changes will impact every single thing we're part of.
A critical mass of people who are living in awareness will automatically create a better world.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ava Whitney Coulter, editor at Mindful, and I'd like to welcome you to this live conversation about the Mindfulness Movement movie with Rob Beemer and Barry Boyce. We'll spend about 45 minutes in conversation about the movie, then we'll have about 15 minutes for Rob and Barry to answer your audience questions at the end. So please do send your questions in the chat as they arise. Now, I'm pleased to welcome our guest, Barry Boyce. Barry is the founding editor of Mindful and Mindful.org, a longtime meditation practitioner and teacher, as well as a professional writer and editor. He's the editor of and a primary contributor to the book, The Mindfulness Revolution, leading psychologists, scientists, artists, and meditation teachers on the power of mindfulness in daily life. Barry also worked closely with Congressman Tim Ryan, who you will see in the movie, as a developmental editor on A Mindful Nation and The Real Food Revolution. I'm also delighted to welcome our guest, Rob Beemer. Rob is co-founder and executive producer of Interesting Stuff Entertainment. He's an Emmy-nominated and award-winning television and film documentary producer, director, and writer. He's been making documentaries for more than 25 years, including several feature-length documentaries and more than 200 hours of network and cable TV programming in a variety of documentary and reality genres, including the mindfulness movement, which we're here to talk about today.
Well, it's very fitting that you're on this conversation, Barry, because credit goes back to you. Because what inspired me was being at a stressed out time in my life in the early to mid 2000s, a stressful job, delivering a bunch of shows to various networks and 2 young kids at home. And in the checkout counter at a grocery store, I saw a copy of the Shambhala Sun and with a feature article about meditation. And I thought, oh, that's something I was kind of interested in as a teenager for a little bit. And I'm very stressed out now, so why don't I give that another try? And so I did, and it did start helping, just helping with burnout and me being too emotionally reactive and losing my temper too often. And so that really became a great help in my life. And then as time went on, I found myself drifting more when Mindful magazine came out and it was more secular, science based. I found myself drifting more towards that. And that felt like the most comfortable fit for me. And so I just kept getting more and more into that. And then eventually felt that um, I should combine my passion for that with my skills as a filmmaker and started researching and trying to figure out, okay, how would I put this all together?
So, Rob, in the film, we get to meet a number of amazing people. How did you decide who you wanted to talk to? How did you go about connecting with them? Were they already in your orbit? Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Since I live in Los Angeles, I started reaching out to Diana Winston at the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center. And she was very kind to talk to me. And, I let her know about the idea for the film and something that would really cover um, both the history, the science, and the interesting places that secular science-based mindfulness was working its way into the world. And so she thought that sounded exciting as well and was kind enough to introduce me to a few people, including Sharon Salzberg. And so it was just kind of a gradual networking process of talking to someone else and then moving, getting introduced to a new person and that network gradually expanding. And I was very fortunate that so many leading voices were able to join the film.
That's wonderful. And certainly a lot of the voices included are dear friends of Mindful, longtime friends I know as well of Barry's, who I hope he's able to join us soon, rejoin us soon.
Yeah,
So,
and since Barry, what was Shambhala's son and then became Mindful Magazine, since he was such an important part of my journey, I felt it was very important to travel up to Halifax. And so we did a day of filming there and kind of a day in the life of putting the magazine and the website together. So that was a lot of fun and felt very important to include that as part of the film.
that was so fun to see in the film. It was just a little bit before my days at Mindful, but I saw some of my friends in the movie and it was great to message them about, haircuts gone by and stuff like that and seeing the process before we all worked from home. So that was certainly great. Both you and Barry, we're talking about how you found your way to mindfulness sort of through this experience of pain, which is something we see over and over again in the movie. As an editor at Mindful, in the people I speak to, the people who go on to become some of the leading mindfulness teachers come to this practice through pain, through trying to heal trauma. I'm wondering, what are the qualities of mindfulness that support so many people in these really hard times?
What really stands out to me and what I wish I had known at a much younger age is I feel like mindfulness just helps you understand the basic process of how your mind works. And it's just crazy to me that schools don't give any information about that. You would think to foster learning, you would want to combine that with some just basic awareness of this is how our minds work. This is the process of thoughts constantly going through our minds. Here are some techniques you can use to quiet things down and focus. So I think it helps so many people because it goes back to such a fundamental level of this is a basic technique to help you calm and control and focus what your mind is doing.
Certainly. And that, again, is something that we see and we hear all the time as well from our readers who find that it's something that you can come back to. You don't need to be in a certain place in order to practice mindfulness. You can call upon it whenever you need. And that's part of what makes it so powerful and so accessible. But that leads me to another question. You described there being sort of two places people tend to come to mindfulness from. One is pain and one is seeking excellence. So I'm wondering, what about, I would say the movie focuses more so on people who are coming to mindfulness out of that place of pain. What about if you're not in crisis? Does mindfulness still have any benefit to you? Or is it sort of only a technique to help people who are in a really dark place?
Well, I can't imagine that someone couldn't benefit in some way. So I think all of us, even if we're not in crisis, we all have challenges that we face, whether it's um, stress at work or some difficult relationships, even if most of our work life or most of our relationships are great. I mean, life is never perfect, right? So there's always some room for, greater understanding of yourself and greater ability to interact with other people and to learn new things and to focus. So I think that, yeah, even if someone isn't in crisis, I think there's always some aspect of somebody's life that could be improved by just that general process of being able to kind of calm your thoughts and reflect on what's most important. And that would then help you focus on, what to do in the future that would help you, increase the enjoyment or your performance even more.
Right. And so I would say one of the ways that we're seeing more and more, more people are able to access mindfulness instruction and just education is through tech, through apps. We saw some tech in the movie with the Muse headsets that turn your brainwaves into sound you can hear that kind of tells you how busy your thoughts are, which is amazing. And I'm wondering, what are your feelings about mindfulness tech? I know that there are some teachers out there who have some trepidation that it's going too far away from, the core mission of sort of coming back to yourself. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my initial thought on that goes back to Punasha Makaya, who's one of the executive producers of the film and is from the tech world. And the way he describes it makes sense to me is that tech is simply a tool. So it's not something that's good or bad, or evil or anything like that. It's another tool. So, if somebody is able to go in person and learn directly from a teacher and enjoys that back and forth and has the time for that, that's great. That probably would be the best way to do it. But not everybody has the time or an instructor nearby. And so I think the tech can be a great other resource for that. Or, just in busy lives, somebody says, hey, I've got 5 minutes to do this. Let me just quickly hop on my phone and play a guided meditation and before I hop into the next thing. So I think it's a great resource. It doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it or that it should never be done that way. It's just another tool that I think can be helpful, and everyone should just find what works for them.
Certainly. I know that, we've seen since the pandemic a massive increase in people who are seeing the benefits and seeking the benefits of mindfulness and meditation. And, there's as many ways to practice it as there are people who are seeking it out. Barry, this movie talks a lot about the value of present moment awareness, as one of those core tenets of mindfulness, and how that can support people in managing what comes up day to day, or just coming back to yourself and getting to know yourself better, getting to know your life better. But that sounds great. It's a lot easier, though, for me to, if I'm feeling something I don't really want to feel, I'm coming up against something that's hard, it's way easier for me to pick up my phone and just start scrolling and get lost, in TikTok videos or whatever. So what is, the value of present moment awareness versus those other coping mechanisms that so many of us turn to on the daily basis?
Well, since I haven't had an opportunity to talk here for a few minutes, and Rob has been carrying all the water, I'll take a few moments with this question. So, one of the teachers we've talked with a lot and has written for us over the years, Caverly Morgan, she runs a program for teenagers in high school called Peace in Schools. It's in Portland, Oregon. And one of the things that she talks about, and she's not alone in this, is how we develop survival strategies. So we actually start out in our life, and in each moment, we start out at present moment awareness. Like right now, try not to be aware. That's an interesting practice. Just do it. Try. Don't be aware. You can't do it. So you are aware. And then something comes up in a flash, and you tell yourself, I can't handle it. So you look for something to think or something to do or some kind of routine that will mollify that fear of that kind of space. And it becomes something that you store away. It's a survival strategy that temporarily it took away some of that sense of being ill at ease with just being with yourself and with what's going on around you. So we have so many of these. They're so familiar to us that we don't even really notice the awareness necessarily anymore until something happens, like maybe we get a glimpse of the sunrise or a flower or somebody's face, or we have a memory of something wonderful, and there's this glimpse of freshness. And meditation practice allows us to have more of those glimpses, so we become familiar with that. And we begin to realize how precious our direct awareness of what's going on with our senses, what's going on in the world around us, what's going on inside of us, our feelings, how other people are doing, that is more enriching and engaging than the prepackaged survival strategy. So over time, our allegiance can begin to shift a bit, which isn't to say that you don't do things that are routine, but you have more interruptions in those prepackaged habitual ways of doing things. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, it does.
Yeah, Dr. Keltner talks about that from Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley about awe. He's written a book recently, a year and a half ago or so, came out about awe, this sense of being fully engaged and in love with what's going on and not feeling the need to just attach ourselves to a storyline or a habitual way of doing things. It allows us also to have fresher responses to what's going on. I don't know if you've ever gotten in an argument with a partner. I don't know. I have to think of that as a hypothetical myself. But in those kinds of situations, if you can step back from it, you can see how frequently each person relies on these prepackaged responses. So we go into a mode where we're not really listening. It's like you were talking about earlier, Rob, about you were getting pissed off too often at work. Well, I had that same experience, particularly during the time when we were starting Mindful, which was galling because I said, God damn it, this is a book about mindfulness. Fuck. Sorry. We're dropping the F-bomb there. It was bound to happen. You have a prepackaged response of losing it. It seems out of the ordinary, but in fact, it's a prepackaged response. You tell yourself, in a way, yeah, I'm going to lose it, and that's going to feel good. And then it doesn't really feel good. That's part of where the motivation comes from, too, Ava, that when we get the results of doing this over and over again, they're not necessarily all that satisfying in terms of relationships and that other part that George Mumford was talking about, how we're performing in the world. You know, we begin to become a bit dissatisfied with that. And I'm sure that was part of your issue too, Rob. You felt pain. You said you came to it because of pain, but also probably a little bit of that other thing, right?
Right. Yeah. Wanting to be successful and achieve things. Sure.
Yeah, in a way that felt more satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
I love what I think it was Dan Harris says in the movie. It was something like, it's not magic. It still requires a lot of you showing up and doing the work.
Right.
And it feels that way. It doesn't feel like magic necessarily all the time. Sometimes, you know, you'll have a moment where you're like, wow, I've never been this serene, but that's not all the time. I would like to pose this next question to both of you. Whoever feels like it can pop in first. But mindfulness meditation is often portrayed and I think generally thought of as a solitary practice, something you do either by yourself alone or you do it by yourself in a group of people, but it's still you having your own inner experience with it. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about mindfulness and healing, not just individuals, but does mindfulness have a role to play in healing systems, in healing parts of society that we're seeing a lot of pain in right now? Can you speak a little bit to that? Whoever wants to pick it up.
Barry, you can take the first stab at it.
Well, yeah, Diana Winston likes to talk about and teach about relational mindfulness. And one of the things that distinguishes mindfulness practice from simply relaxation is that while it has a relaxing element, the relaxation is you're relaxing that kind of habituated response I was talking about and resting in this pre-existing awareness. But it doesn't end there, because when you have that kind of awareness, you begin to get insight into your own responses, your relationships with other people, the choices you're making. And when people use these methods together, they can begin to communicate with each other with the benefit of this kind of spaciousness, deeper listening, and insight. So, for example, one of the methodologies that was created by some mindfulness practitioners is known as nonviolent communication, which is a means of resolving issues that groups and systems have without falling into the us and them blaming game. And it's the mindfulness that helps people see, hey, we can start with how we're connected and then see how to resolve differences. Now, I've worked with Tim Ryan, who recently left Congress to run for the Senate, and sadly he lost, but he now has an organization called We the People. And a big part of We the People's mission is mindfulness for various kinds of groups. Tim was really dedicated to bringing that kind of understanding into his political work. And he'd be the first to tell you, making broad systemic change is very, very difficult. But if you choose the arenas that you want to work within, you can make headway. For example, I gave the example of Caverly earlier, Caverly Morgan and Peace in Schools. Well, the entire U.S. education system hasn't been transformed, but more than a few students, and I've seen them in Portland, Oregon, benefited from a space that was hate-free and had open communication and no social media while they were in that room, and no disturbance from phones, and able to get in touch with their mind and body together as a group. So that's systemic change at an embryonic level.
Yeah, and just to quickly follow up on Barry's point, I wanted to make the film in part to clear up a number of misconceptions. And I think one of the misconceptions of mindfulness is, oh, if you just practice that, you're just being selfish and you're navel gazing. But, you know, a real understanding of mindfulness is that you start by working on yourself. And then, as Barry said, you know, start incorporating relationships with other people. When you're more centered, then you can really listen to someone, and then it can start growing. And then you can start, you know, forming groups with other people or a group that you're a part of, kind of keep things on track. As Barry said, avoid the us and them, and that it can just keep growing. So I think when some people say, oh, mindfulness, you're just focusing on yourself, that's really a misunderstanding, that it's a means to center yourself and have more awareness, so then you can go out into the world and help other people.
Certainly, and I think that's something that the film shows over and over again as well. You know, we see the guys at the Holistic Life Foundation taking what they learned as kids and bringing it to as many people as possible. We see it with Tim Ryan. We see it with Jewel. Over and over again, people are inspired by what they're feeling and take it and try to share it, which is beautiful.
Yeah, and and for instance, Dan Harris, I mean, that in a, you know, very competitive field, and he was worried that mindfulness might make him more passive, but then it turns out you really are able to focus more and get more things done in a more effective but also empathetic way. So you know, it is something that can really help both yourself and other people.
Certainly. And this is another question I will put out to both of you, because one thing that this film has in common with Mindful as a publication and, you know, media organization is that both talk about mindfulness specifically in a secular sense. And I think we all know that obviously mindfulness is inherent in so many ancient traditions, religions. Most people associate it with Buddhism. Why talk about it in a secular way?
Well, for me, it was important to present it in that way because that is what has allowed it to be in schools and, you know, companies and all different types of places. Because if you didn't separate it from that, then certain people would really object to, well, you can't have it in a public school if you're presenting it as, you know, something that's Buddhist. So to me, that was such a key. But it's also, Tim Ryan says in the film, he was so relieved to find out he could keep his Catholic faith and add the mindfulness practice to that. So to me, presenting it as secular is not a means of excluding religion necessarily. It's saying you can practice it without any kind of spiritual tradition, or you can incorporate it into that. And so to me, it was important to show that it has that flexibility.
Yeah, I would echo and reinforce what Rob said. I think it's very helpful to allow mindfulness to infiltrate in and be part of what's going on in the public square. In the public square, everyone ideally is treated equally. And there's incredible diversity. You have, in the public square, you have people of every kind of faith tradition and ethnicity and class. And so secular is this kind of dry, technical word that almost makes it sound like you've taken all the juice out of it. But it doesn't mean that. It simply means open, free to all, not discriminating. Some of the Buddhists, and I'm going to say some of people who complain, Buddhists who complain about the mindfulness movement, I sometimes refer to them as reactionary Buddhists, will say that, well, there's no ethical basis to mindfulness once it's not in a religious context. But that's really unfair to human beings, because all human beings have some form of ethics, some form of morality that they follow. Now, it may be flawed in some ways, but nevertheless, there's every kind of ethical guideline in all kinds of contexts. If you work within the media, there's guidelines you follow. There's guidelines you follow in school. There's guidelines for how to behave on the bus. The world is filled with codes of how we behave, and mindfulness can incorporate those. For example, there's a lot of mindfulness being practiced in medicine. Medicine doesn't need the Buddhist specific ethical system. It already has one. So that really is trying to say that mindfulness has to stay Buddhist. And really, mindfulness is one of the practices of Buddhism that existed prior to Buddhism. So the big arena is mindfulness, and mindfulness is practiced in Buddhism as a subset, just like mindfulness practiced in medicine, mindfulness practiced in schools, mindfulness practiced in city halls. Buddhism is just one of the means of making use of mindfulness.
Yeah, and the contemplative practices and other spiritual and religious practices.
Absolutely, because mindfulness really is, there's plenty of like indigenous traditions that have contemplative practices that could easily, I would label as mindfulness. So it's not simply something that historically, yes, a lot of the early teaching in the West was done by Buddhists using Buddhist techniques, but there are lots of contemplative techniques. As Mirabai Bush, from the former contemplative mind in society could tell you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this question has nothing to do with anything. I apologize for constantly interrupting the flow of conversation, but I'm wondering, Rob and Barry, do you have a hard stop at an hour? Otherwise, if not, I'll err on going a little over time because some of it was taken up by tech struggles.
Sure. I'm flexible.
No, I'm fine. I'm flexible.
Great. Awesome.
I mean, within limits. I mean, I don't want to be 4 or 5 hours from now. I mean, but, yeah.
Sure.
Definitely. We did have a bit of a rocky start there at the beginning.
A little bit.
It shows our equanimity and resilience that we've stuck it out. I was inspired by watching the fog out here and realizing that with the foghorn going, that there are people having to navigate through the fog. So we were doing the same thing there for a little while.
The digital fog.
Yeah, the digital fog, exactly.
Absolutely, we were. So in that case, I would like to come back to the beginning for a moment. And Barry, I'm going to ask you a question I already asked that I think a lot of us weren't able to really hear properly. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you first came to mindfulness? I know I was only hearing one word here and there, so I'd love for you to tell us again.
Years old. You couldn't understand what I was saying. So I was the youngest of 7 children. I'm going to give you my whole history. I grew up during the 60s and the 70s. So a number of those siblings got involved with yoga and meditation. And, that made an impression on me. You kind of look up to your older brothers and sisters, and there was quite an influx of that kind of thing at that time. And similar to Rob talked about taking an interest in meditation when he was a teenager. It's a time of a lot of searching, and a combination of searching and angst and open-mindedness. You're open to new ideas and new possibilities. I find I have a lot of affinity with teenagers, perhaps as a result of having started with mindfulness. That's why I love Peace in Schools so much, and what the Baltimore guys are doing, and the IBME program for teenagers. That period of time, you're trying to separate yourself, have some individuality, who I am, at the same time that you want to be totally embraced and loved. So you want to break free from your parents, but you want them to be taking care of you. And you want to demonstrate how you're different from your peers, but you totally want to feel that you belong. It's a practically impossible time. So meditation came to me as, a real possibility at that time. And when I started out, I did a 4 or 5 day meditation program. And on the next to last day, we had to meditate for an entire day. And I thought I would crawl out of my skin. This is horrible. This is some form of torture. Just sit here and do nothing, when you're 17. But a certain something clicked. There were just enough gaps where I felt some relief, and I stuck with it. I very nearly quit a lot in the early days. So I have a lot of sympathy and understanding for people who say, I can't do this, I quit. And I think in the back of my mind, holy shit, man, if I stuck with it, you can, because I was ready to jump off a cliff. I'm not a calm guy. In any case, it has made a huge difference in my life. And I'm just so very, very thankful to be able to have insight into my own thoughts and feelings and relationships in a way that has some spaciousness around it. I'm just infinitely grateful for that. Grateful to the people who taught me, grateful for the opportunity to keep learning and keep meeting people and being inspired by how mindfulness manifests for them. It's one of the interesting things is that real mindfulness is so non-doctrinal and dogmatic. It's like nobody's an expert. It's just your mind, baby. I mean, just so, you just encounter it fresh and enjoy spending time encountering it freshly with other people rather than telling them, how to think about, how to think and, what their problem is, which is one of the last thing I'll say is that one of the things that does irk me a little bit is that sometimes the marketing of mindfulness is so problem based. You have a problem and it needs to be fixed. When in fact, you are totally presently moment aware right now. That more positive message, which I think comes through in the mindfulness movie, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Barry, for answering the question for a second time. We all appreciate it. And I will ask you both one more question before we move on to Q&A, because I can see we have some great questions coming through. So I'm wondering how you see the role of mindfulness evolving in society, considering the global challenges we're facing now. When you look to the future, what are your hopes for the mindfulness movement? Not specifically the movie, but, the movement.
Well, to me, I think, it's great that it has become so much more popular and widespread. And then obviously there's the potential downside of the over commercialization. So I think that is something to be aware of. And as Barry said, if it's, presented as, oh, this is going to solve all of your problems, right away. So I do think it's important for people when they get into it to have the realistic expectations and to not look at it as the magic, silver bullet that solves everything right away. But also, I think as technology keeps increasing and information just flows faster and faster, and there are always new forms of distraction coming, that I do think it's more important than ever and a great way for people to just, simplify things a little bit before they step back out into the flow of information, and to just, be able to take some moments and center, and again, just understand how the basic brain process works. And, it is very easy for people to get distracted. So let me step out of that and just take a few moments and calm, so that when I am presented with new information, I can, process that in a healthy way.
Right. How about you, Barry?
Yeah, well, it's a long range, lifelong, multi-generational process and movement. And, there have been setbacks. COVID was tough on a lot of organizations that rely on people gathering together. At the same time, people discovered there's a lot that can be done online when you manage to work through the digital fog. It would be great if we had mindfulness centers in every significant city, where people could go and sit and meditate. But the fact of the matter is, we're in the middle of a real estate crisis. So it's very hard to open up such places and pay the kind of rents that are required to provide that kind of thing. So there are many challenges like that people in the mindfulness movement will need to innovate around. How can we reach into more sectors of society in ways that really take hold? Because sometimes, somebody will go into a company and there'll be a champion of mindfulness in that company. But then when that champion moves on, or there's a cost-cutting regime comes in, then mindfulness is not in that company anymore. So I have great faith in the long-term prospects, but there are a lot of challenges, and funding is one of them. We need to innovate as much as possible. One more thing I'd say is that, a lot of the kind of tenor of the times, a lot of what your ear and ends up devouring in the media contains a lot of anger, a lot of agitation. There's almost a belief that being incredibly angry is a state of mind that enables you to solve problems. And that's far from the understanding that comes from mindfulness. So somehow we need to enter into that broader conversation so that it's really represented more, that people have more examples of people who exemplify this way of doing things. Right now we're in a period where we're seeing fewer such examples in the media sphere. Like somebody like a John Lewis, who represents that kind of quiet confidence and exudes mindfulness. We need more such exemplars.
Yes, absolutely. And so now I will take us to the Q&A section of this. For all of those who are watching, please feel free to pop your questions in the chat. I will start with one that I saw come in from Chelsea Arsenault, who Barry and I know. Glad to see that you're here, Chelsea. She asked, Rob, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced while producing the documentary, and how did you overcome them?
Well, Barry just mentioned funding for different mindfulness organizations, and funding is always going to be a big issue for any independent documentary. So I would say that was the biggest thing. So after I had kind of reached out to a number of people and felt I had a great lineup of experts and looked into some different interesting places that were using mindfulness, because that was very important to me, not to present it as just, oh, here's something for affluent people. I wanted people to see it's in inner city schools and prisons, but that required traveling to a lot of places. So funding was the biggest obstacle. But we, just kept working through it, and we, raise that money and be able to do some filming and then raise some more. And certainly once Deepak Chopra and Joel became involved, that helped bring in some more funding from other sources. So it's, was a very gradual process, but and not easy, but it was a passion project. And so I, was determined to see it through.
And as a follow-up to that, what has been the most rewarding aspect of this journey? It sounds like it had ups and downs, like, all things in life.
Yeah. Well, my goal in making it in the first place was, I found it very helpful in my own life. And so I just wanted to use my skills as a filmmaker to get something out there that would be both informative and inspiring, and so that as many people as possible would learn about the benefits of mindfulness. And so the most gratifying part has been both seeing that, it's been watched in more than 90 countries and getting feedback from people around the world that, oh, this was very helpful to me, or I didn't understand a lot about mindfulness before, and this really laid it out. Or even people who are very, familiar and had been practicing for a long time, and then saying, "Oh, hey, I learned something new. I thought I knew everything, but I still learned something new." So that's the most gratifying part is just hearing that it has helped a lot of people and inspired people to either start a practice or keep going.
That's awesome. Next question can be for anybody. This person is wondering, how can I feel connected or a sense of community on my mindfulness journey? They're having, it sounds like, some struggles finding places and ways to practice with other people, and that makes it, easier to slip out of the habit, let it go for a while, come back to it, forget about it. What would your recommendations be?
Barry, you want to take this?
Yeah, well, I mentioned in my rant earlier there that, that would be great to have places where people could meditate in lots of cities. And there have been some in various cities that have had to close down because they just couldn't afford the rent. If you want to locate in a place that people can reach, you're competing with restaurants and bars and places that for their square footage they're bringing in a lot more money. So you have to work at this is the short answer. You have to set the strong intention that I'm going to find some mindfulness buddies and see if you can find them online and do some group practice online. I know people who are doing that. I have a friend who has a meditation group. I mentioned her earlier, Mirabai Bush. They meet, I can't remember how frequently, but it's pretty frequently. I was visiting her and I joined the meditation group. And it's clear they'd been meditating together, about, a dozen people, and they hook in and they were from all over the country. So that virtual group was really working for her. And I think that's one thing you can try. You can look in the mindfulness directory, see if you can find organizations or people local to you. As I say, the larger story is it's a place where we have to innovate because there isn't quite as much available as would be ideal. And see if you can get to go to a meditation center every once in a while and you meet some other folks there once they're allowed to talk.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the process starts digitally, just in terms of searching, but then hopefully that leads to something local and, even possibly something just through places like Yelp or meetup.com has, a lot of information about different in-person groups. So there's, a wide range of ways to follow it, or maybe there's a specific Facebook group or something that's within your area. So again, starting digitally and then hopefully leading to in-person opportunities.
Absolutely. And one thing I will...
We, the people, wants to do, have a nationwide meditation practice that somebody could sponsor. So,
right.
Hello,
that
Tim.
would be amazing.
Get going, Tim.
I will mention one of the resources that Barry said was the Mindful Directory, and you can find them by looking it up, probably on Google, but it's also at mindful.org if you're interested in that. Another question that I'll pose to both of you. One person is looking for tips and techniques for working with and befriending deep grief. They have an adult child who doesn't live near them, has a new diagnosis of a troubling health condition, and they're feeling a lot of stress and anxiety for their child, understandably so. Something we talked about earlier in this conversation is that a lot of people come to mindfulness. Everything okay, Barry?
Barry, you have technical issues?
Anyways, a lot of people come to mindfulness from these places of pain, moments of crisis in their lives. What would you say is a first step someone dealing with something like this could take?
I think I better answer since I'm not sure if Barry is here.
Yeah.
Probably have the more informed answer because I'm not a mindfulness teacher or anything, but what I've learned through my own practice and talking to so many great experts, I think, the first step would be mindfulness just helping you understand the emotions you're feeling and, accepting what you're feeling, because having difficult emotions with that situation makes complete sense. But then also helping not to be overwhelmed by all of that. So if you are getting in touch, being aware of those emotions and then able to learn about what is kind of coming through the strongest, and to then kind of redirect yourself sometimes to something else where you're not overwhelmed, then you can kind of develop a game plan for how to deal with the situation. So it kind of goes back to a Buddhist term of wise action. So in a difficult situation like that, first centering yourself, calming yourself, becoming aware of the emotions. And then when you have some more clarity in terms of that, that helps inform you to, okay, what can I do? Even though this person is thousands of miles away, what are some steps I can take both to help them and to help myself not become overwhelmed so that I'm able to be there for them?
Absolutely. I'm not sure, Barry, if you heard that, but there was somebody who wrote in who's currently experiencing a moment of deep grief and is wondering, like, where do you start in a moment like that? How can mindfulness support?
Well, I think what Rob said made a lot of sense. Grief is inevitable and unavoidable in life. It goes along with love. Love and grief are in the same territory. If you love, you will grieve, and we face all kinds of losses in our life, and difficult circumstances. So I think when when you're in a situation like you are now, accepting the depth of the feeling, giving yourself permission, and then trying to find a relief and respite within that, and seek help. It's it's hard to do alone.
Mm-hmm.
And mindfulness really in that situation is it's a really good example of how the marketing around mindfulness just kind of instantly making you calm is so far off the mark, because mindfulness really gets tested when you're in a situation like the one you've described, where the best you can do is just to get in touch with your feeling and put one foot in front of the other and not get buried under the waves. You're feeling what you're feeling because you're a loving, caring, engaged, empathetic human being. So you're fully being a human being. And part of that is your awareness, just to be aware of what's going on and give yourself permission. Care for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if in that kind of situation, if you are going into it with that, then that hopefully gives you a better chance of communicating, with the other person without getting overwhelmed about just how you're feeling, how you're experiencing what they're going through, how you want to be helpful, but you're also letting them know what you're struggling with. And so that it becomes hopefully more of a partnership of how we can, deal with this together.
Yeah, absolutely. Wisdom, I think we can all probably take to different parts of our lives as well. But I hope that this was helpful for the person who wrote that in. And on that note, looking at the time, I'll ask just one more question, which is to open it up to both you, Rob and Barry, and just say, is there anything you want our audience to know about mindfulness, about the mindfulness movement, the film, that we didn't touch on today that you feel like is important to say before we close out?
Well, I'll say one thing is that we've talked about some of the misconceptions, and Barry talked about how he came very close to quitting, and it's a struggle for me too. I think for everybody. So to me, one of the important misconceptions to clear up in the film and here too is just that so many people go into it thinking I've got to clear my mind. And if I have thoughts continually going through my mind, I'm doing it wrong and I'm not good at this, and forget it. It's not for me. And I think it's so important for people to understand that the way our brains are wired is we're always going to have thoughts coming through. And so understanding that process, and that when you are sitting and trying to meditate, and focus maybe just on your breath or whatever it is, and you find yourself getting distracted, but you become aware that you're distracted, and then you have a chance to return to your focus. So many people see that as an opportunity to start beating themselves up. Oh, I screwed up. But really, that's a moment of triumph right there. That's you being aware that your mind wandered and having the awareness to bring it back to a focus. So as Dan Goleman says in the film, that's like doing another rep at the gym. That's that process of building that focus. So to me, that's so important for people to understand so they don't get discouraged right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, thanks. Well said, Rob. And I'll just add a little bit that mindfulness is not a thing that happens in your head. It's a whole body mind experience of just through your senses and your awareness getting in touch with where you already are. So it's so immediate, and you don't need any equipment of any kind. It's totally free and available, and you can click into it in a moment. And in terms of your commitment to mindfulness, it can be just a little bit, or it can be more. It can, there's no one size fits all. Just whatever level or degree you find helpful. And so, welcome aboard.
And I'll add one other quick thing is that, in terms of habit forming, like James Clear has a book, Atomic Habits. And so if you're having trouble sticking with a practice, there's resources like that where you can just look at habit formation things, whether it's, doing it at a certain type of time of day, okay, immediately after I wake up or after I have breakfast or before I go to bed. Those types of things, can really help people who are having trouble sticking with it consistently.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Barry and Rob, and to our audience today. Thank you all for sticking with us through that initial digital fog, I think we called it, to watch the mindfulness movement, the movie that we've been talking about this whole time. You can visit the link that's been sent in the chat or visit mindfulness.com. For more of Rob and his work, you can find him on social media and at his website, interestingstufFentertainment.com. And for more from Barry, you can find his books by giving his name a Google search. And you can read many of his articles on mindful.org. Thank you so much again for being here. Take care.
Thank you, Ava. Thank you, Barry. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Ava.